there and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we are taking a look at some more SUVs because we couldn't get enough of those last time round. We begin with the 2009 Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT8, 420 horsepower, 420 foot-pound torque, 4,794 pounds of weight. Before Chrysler became even more crazy and started putting Hellcat engines into everything, they were putting SRT8 motors into a lot of their products, and the Jeep Grand Cherokee is one such vehicle. Interestingly, a little tidbit for you, they tried to sell this in England, didn't really work because we don't really have the fuel prices to deal with a big V8 performance SUV, but that's something they tried when Chrysler decided to come across to the UK in the late 2000s, and it didn't go well because they sold nothing but garbage. Anyways, the Jeep Grand Cherokee, I'm not a huge fan of this, I'll be honest. This car's been around since like 1999, I think this facelift made it look really awkward, although I will say on the SRT8 model, I'll give them some credit for the mid-mounted exhaust pipes, which look out of place and ridiculous, and I kind of like it. As far as it goes to drive, well, it works a bit as well as you'd expect when you stick a big powerful engine into a vehicle that obviously was not designed for it. It handles like a truck. I will say, thinking about it, the SRT8 motor in this 420 horsepower probably isn't that far off what the Grand Cherokee was making anyway. The power to weight ratio on this thing probably isn't so good, but actual straight line performance is pretty good. It actually still drives quite crazy, even though the handling is abysmal, as you can see there. The actual sort of performance attributes, acceleration-wise, it actually is still quite quick, which was surprising. Next up, 2012 Cadillac Escalade ESV, 404 horsepower, 416 foot-pound torque, 5,982 pounds of weight. This is the heaviest car here today, which is unsurprising because it's sort of a normal, massive, Americanized SUV, you know, 7-row seating, stuff like that. The Escalade is up there with stuff like the Expedition, I guess would be the best way to describe it. The Escalade is kind of an interesting one. It was an interesting choice to bring this into Forza, especially considering by 2012 the Escalade hype had sort of died down. I remember in the early 2000s these things were everywhere. They were on rap CDs, in videos, people were importing these things, you know, you had them even in Need for Speed Underground 2. But by this sort of generation of Escalade, the hype had really rather died down, and what we ended up with is it's sort of just a giant family SUV for a family that didn't quite want a Mercedes, so that's what we ended up with here. As far as it goes to drive, I will say there is one very surprising feature of this car. It handles a lot sharper than you'd expect it to. You turn in and the front end will go. It's actually really quite surprising. Don't get me wrong, it's still quite heavy, it's still got understeer. But the steering on this thing is surprisingly sharp. It changes direction surprisingly well. I was, yeah, pleasantly surprised by the Escalade. You know, it's not quick, it's heavy, but, I mean, it's better handling than the Jeep, so I wouldn't recommend it for anything, but, you know, it's something strange, shall we say. Next up, we have the 2014 Lamborghini Urus concept car, 552 horsepower, 553 foot-pound torque, 4,400 pounds of weight. Of course, since this car was added back in Forza way back in Horizon 2, we've since had the actual Urus come out. That's now in Forza Horizon 4. Although, to be honest with you, between the production Urus and this car, there isn't all that much different. The concept car is powered by a twin-turbo Audi V8, which I thought was surprising because looking at those power figures, I was expecting the Gallardo's V10, which I think would have made the Urus really cool. But no, it's a twin-turbo V8. Of course, based on an Audi chassis, and even looking at it, I mean, it's slightly more aggressive than the finished product, I guess. That looks slightly worse, in all honesty. It's probably a little bit smaller as well. But other than stuff like the camera-mounted side mirrors, there's not all that much difference between the two cars. As far as it goes to drive, well, it's got an Audi engine and an Audi chassis, so you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that it drives kind of like an Audi. Think of this thing as a roided-up TTRS, and you're pretty much on the same sort of grounds. Maybe a little bit more understeery than that, but yeah, as far as SUVs go, you can't really do much better handling than the Urus, which is really unsurprising to say the least, and yeah, it was a pleasant to drive car, but I was sort of expecting good things out of the Urus. Next up, we have the 2015 Range Rover Sport SVR, 550 horsepower, 502 foot-pound torque, 5,148 pounds of weight. Of course, the Range Rover is the be and end all of all sort of luxury SUVs, although the Sport is a little bit different. It's not quite the full-size Range Rover. It is based on the same chassis these days, but the Sport is designed to be a little bit more compact. I don't think it offers 7-row seating, and yeah, as such, it has an SVR model of it. SVR, what is that? Well, the SVR is essentially, they take the supercharged V8 engine from a Jaguar F-Type and plump it into the Range Rover, so you have a supercharged 5-litre V8. Yeah, it's kind of a similar process to the SRT8, although it's actually been thought out, so this thing's got different suspension, brakes, so on and so forth. As far as it goes to drive, well, it's definitely understeer prone, and it's definitely heavy. That's unsurprising. It's not terrible. I mean, it drives pretty much as you'd expect a performance SUV to drive. You know, I don't want to be one of those people, but it's obvious that these things aren't going to handle like sports cars because they're massive and tall and weigh over 2 tons. But it's not bad. You know, I like the Sport SVR. It's probably the best looking of all the vehicles here. Probably my favourite of sort of the modern crop of sports SUVs, even though I'm still not a massive fan of these things. Speaking of which, a cunt has entered the track. It's the 2015 BMW X6M. 567 horsepower, 553 foot-pound torque, 5,185 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful car here today, and it's interesting this thing weighs more than the Range Rover, despite the fact this is supposed to be a coupe. Yeah, I don't mind performance SUVs. I don't particularly like them, I don't particularly understand them, but I don't mind them. However, these coupe SUV, I don't know what the hell these things are. The X6, the X4, the Mercedes-Benz GLC or whatever it is. Who buys these things? That's what I like. Who looks at these vehicles and goes, "Oh yeah, that's a good-looking car." That I don't understand them. Either way, we've got one here. It's the X6M. In fairness to BMW, we've had X5Ms around before, and the X5M is actually a pretty good handling car. It handles a lot better than you'd expect. And this one, yeah, it's actually alright to drive. It looks hideous, and I wouldn't drive it if you paid me, but it actually drives okay. You know, there's a bit of understeering here, as you'd expect, but then obviously it's no M5 for the track or anything like that. But, yeah, no, probably one of the better driving SUVs here today. You know, this and the Urus, probably the best of the bunch, I'd say, if I had to guess. But, yeah, no, not a bad handling car, it's just, why does it exist? Next up, 2017 Jaguar FPace S, 380 horsepower, 332 foot-pound torque, 4,015 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful, least torquey, and lightest vehicle we have here today. This one, in fairness to it, unlike pretty much everything else here today other than the Urus, this is sort of the only mid-size SUV. I guess it's a mid-size SUV crossover. I don't know what the hell you want to call this thing. I know what I call it, and I call it pretty good. I think the F-Pace is a great looking SUV. I like these things quite a lot. Jaguar doesn't really make ugly cars these days, and yeah, no, the F-Pace and the E-Pace both do look good. Now, whether they are actually good or not is questionable, but they're not too bad. I believe since this, the F-Pace has actually been upgraded to an SVR model, so you can get the supercharged V8 from the Range Rover. That I'd love to drive in Forza. But this one being an S means that we do have to deal with a V6. Admittedly a V6 with a decent amount of power, and with it being lighter, how does the F-Pace drive? It actually drives kind of like a hot hatch, I think. Think Focus RS, but nowhere near as sharp, and you're pretty much on the right path. The only problem with this one, it sort of hops a little bit. When you turn it into corners, fast corners, it just sort of skips along the track a little bit, which is a bit weird. But yeah, no, probably the most fun SUV here today, if I'm being honest, but I can't say that was too surprising. But yeah, no, the F-Pace is pretty good. Next up, the 2018 Dodge Durango SRT, 475 horsepower, 470 foot-pound torque, 5,510 pounds of weight. So this is another big full-size SUV, a lot like the Escalade, you know, 7-seater, all the rest of it. Basically the modern-day station wagon, I guess, would be the best way to describe the Durango SRT. And of course, I said we'd be getting on to vehicles with SRT V8 engines, like the Grand Cherokee, and this is one such example. This car should not be an SRT under any establishment. It also probably shouldn't be in Forza, but I kind of like the Durango. I think it looks kind of cool. I like the sort of menacing look, especially in this red paint. I actually, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of most of sort of Dodge's product line these days, but I have to say the Durango is actually quite a good looking vehicle, which I guess could be quite hypocritical. The Durango, it's surprisingly great to drive. This and the Escalade were probably the biggest surprises here today. It's heavy, don't get me wrong, but it actually, you know, coming out of even the Jag and the X6, this drives great. I really was quite surprised by how good this thing actually is. Whether it's quick or not, we'll have to wait and see, but yeah, the Durango was a pleasant surprise. I quite enjoyed the Durango, which is weird to say. And finally today, the epitome of these performance SUVs, I guess the car that started it all, kind of, the 2018 Porsche Cayenne Turbo, 550 horsepower, 567 foot-pounds torque, 4,796 pounds of weight. This is the talkiest car here today. The Cayenne is probably responsible for the entire list of exotic SUVs we've got these days. The Urus, the Ferrari one that's coming out, the Aston Martin. It all started with the Cayenne, because Porsche really wanted to make an SUV for some reason, and in fairness to them, it turned out to be quite popular. The Cayenne's gone from strength to strength since then. I've never been a massive fan of the Cayenne. I guess this new one looks okay, even if it is a bit gopping with the grille. But yeah, I mean, the Cayenne doesn't do much for me, but obviously it does quite a bit for the buyers of this thing. As far as it goes to drive, it's pretty decent. It struggles at slower speeds, which is something I noticed, but it's actually not that bad. In terms of weight, it's actually really quite light. It's the third lightest car here today, and it's only because the Grand Cherokee weighs 2 pounds less. So yeah, it actually is surprisingly lightweight considering what it is. But yeah, no, the Cayenne was alright. You know, it's after driving a load of these cars, I was kind of happy to get out of them. So maybe I'm seeing it with rose-tinted glasses a bit, but yeah, the Cayenne's alright. Out of the sort of modern SUV lot, I'd probably say the X6 is the better driving of the bunch though. On to the times then, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the quickest vehicle of today was the Lamborghini Urus concept car, 121.781, putting it into 153rd place. Actually not a bad time, it only loses out slightly to M5, M6, quicker than an M2 Coupe, Challenger Hellcat, the Bowler EXRS, which is a purpose-built race vehicle, which is interesting. In 184th place we find the Porsche Cayenne Turbo, 123.001, beats out an NSXR, TTRS, you know, a bunch of sort of middling sports coupes, which actually isn't too bad, and that makes it the quickest of the performance SUVs, although I'd probably still go with the X6M. Speaking of which, in 196th place, the BMW X6M, 123.586, beats out an R34 Skyline. I'm sure that's got to piss off quite a few people, and the Focus RS, Mustang GT. Yeah, a decent enough time from the X6M, but it's still the most hideous vehicle ever made. Moving down the board some more, we find the Range Rover Sport SVR, 124.529. Interestingly, not that far off being beaten by the Levante. It only just beats the Levante, and the Levante is a lot smaller and a lot cheaper, which is interesting. Also, only just beats out a Jaguar XES, which I'd probably buy over a Range Rover Sport, I'm not going to lie. In 247th place, we find the Dodge Durango SRT, 125.899, which actually does surprisingly well. Beats out a few Porsches, Mitsubishi Lancer, Subaru Impreza WRX. It sort of goes right in that Subaru Mitsubishi battleground, which I wasn't expecting, but yeah, no, I actually really like the Durango. It might be my favourite driving of the cars here today. In 256th place, the Jaguar FPace S, 126.002, only just gets beaten out by an RS3 Sportback, which I think is actually kind of competitive with the FPace, I'll be honest. I'd probably rather drive the FPace because the RS3 wasn't particularly good to drive. Moving down once again, we find in 297th place the Jeep Grand Cherokee with a 127.818. Goes in between a Mazda RX-8 and an Audi S1. Beats out an Aston Martin V8 Vantage from many years ago, Ford Focus RS, Golf R32. Yeah, I mean, actually, to be considering their sort of hot hatches that weren't too old when that car came out, that's not too bad. And finally, unsurprisingly, in 451st place, we find the Cadillac Escalade ESV, 135.146, which actually isn't that bad a time. I thought it was going to do a hell of a lot worse. Does beat out a Nissan 240SX, though, which is funny. Anyways, so there you go. That is some more SUVs. They actually did surprisingly well, given their size and weight, and also how we think an SUV would drive. You'd think they'd be awful, but actually, they're not too bad. Again, I wouldn't drive these over any sports car pretty much, but they're not too bad. In terms of favourites here today, I think the Durango is the best driving of the bunch, although obviously it's not the quickest. Between all the performance SUVs, the X6M is the better handling of the bunch, the Cayenne Turbo is obviously the quickest, and the Range Rover Sport's my favourite, so we can't really reach any form of conclusion on those. Yeah, I mean, other than the Durango, maybe the FPace, because the FPace is kind of fun. I wouldn't really choose any of these for much. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching this edition of Forza Top Gear Laps. Next time we go from a bunch of cars that I'm not particularly a fan of to a bunch of cars I'm much a fan of, as we take a look once again at another creator's choice. Join us for that. Until then, farewell.
You know the sorrow that my heart holds in knowing just where my hopes and dreams are going. I'll only you got up in a wall that you are not part of. Eyes on this letter.